Yo, what's up everyone, Swillow here, and today we have our first character guide for One Piece Pirate Warriors 4. So first up we have Kuzan. He was pretty widely requested, and I also think he's a good character to start with because he's a rather technical character with a lot of options. So let's get right into this. I think Kuzan's a great character in this game. Overall, I think this is like his best iteration, especially because of the way his freeze effect is just a lot more prominent and strong in this game. So let's go and look at his special moves first. His full force burst. His full force burst is actually really good for him because of his Logia type benefits, where he's going to take no hit stun and reduce the damage. On top of that, being a tech type and having a status effect, his freeze status effect from the Chili Chili Fruit, makes him really strong in terms of just immobilizing enemies and not really having a lot of resistance. So his Logia benefits combined with his ability to freeze enemies means that he has a very natural self-defense mechanism, and you usually don't have any need to bring defense-based skills playing as Kuzan because of that, because he already has inherently strong defense. Next up, Icicle Tempest. Icicle Tempest is a pretty strong forward-hitting Muso type special attack. This move, if you're trying to attack enemies with armor, you either want to stand further back because it's a forward moving attack. If you haven't broken the armor yet, you may slide right past the enemy, so you either want to stand further back when you're starting up against an enemy with armor, or you want to break armor first before you use this so that you don't slide past the enemy. Ice Star. This is one of his absolute best moves. This hits a huge space in front of him, does good damage and armor break, all around solid move. Ice Block Pheasant. This is like a projectile that launches forward in a narrow path, and the main perks of this is that it deals pretty solid damage and it can be used in the air, as opposed to his other two Muso specials which cannot be used in the air. Ice Block Sledgehammer. So this hits kind of like a circle radius slightly in front of him, and it's a really slow startup, so you have to use it when you have the enemies immobilized and you have a good opening. As it says here in the description, deals massive damage to frozen enemies. So pretty much the only time you should really be using this is when enemies are frozen. And the damage is, I don't know if I would say it's massive. It is really good damage, which makes it a solid move to use. But massive is a bit over exaggerating, I feel like. Ice Block 1000 Spears. This move right here is a really unfortunate case. He's gonna launch the ice spears forward, and you can kind of turn during it. The only problem is that the amount of damage these deal is pitifully low. The armor break is low, the damage is low, and you're very vulnerable during this. It's very easy to get knocked out of this. Even if you take all of the cumulative damage from like all of the spears, it never adds up to anything meaningful. This is just not a very good move, but you can definitely have fun with it. It's more for the swag. Ice Rain. So Ice Rain is a really interesting move. It's a passive effect where ice balls are gonna drop around you randomly, like within a big space around you. Now, this is a pretty cool move in the sense that you can just throw it up and forget about it, and it's gonna hit enemies, it's gonna freeze them, it's gonna deal like an okay amount of damage and an okay amount of armor damage. The only thing is that you really don't have any control of how this is gonna hit, so it doesn't really benefit the fight at hand. You know, you may get lucky and it hits an enemy you're currently fighting and it just may make an impact, but in most cases you just kind of throw this on and you just kind of like reap the benefits of the cumulative damage you may get throughout the whole map. But the thing is that the damage may never be meaningful towards your objectives. So this is a really cool move, but at the same time, if you're really trying to focus your target and your damage, then this is not the greatest move for that, because you never know how much this move is actually going to pay off in the long run. Ice Monument. This is actually a really cool move. He puts an ice pillar, ice monument as it's called, and this just sits there. It sits there, and when things run into it, they will get hit, they'll take hit stun, or they'll get frozen. It has a high freeze rate, So you can just kind of put this out and it controls space. You can stand around it and you're going to be extremely safe from even like strong enemies. This is actually a pretty good move, but it takes a lot of skill to use effectively, you know? If you just kind of throw it out and forget about it, or you don't utilize it, or you end up moving away from it, then you're not really going to get much value from it. So you have to be able to like know when you're about to have a big fight and where you can place it so that it actually adds value to that fight. But this is a pretty cool move if you use it correctly. Ice Trap. So Ice Trap is one of these interesting style counter attacks that this game has, where when you put it up, once you get hit over a set period of time, your character will automatically do a counter attack. Now, this counter attack freezes, which is pretty strong, but I don't know how I feel about these kind of counters. Like, they're interesting, but the fact that you never know when or how it's going to trigger because you have to get hit and then it triggers on its own makes it a little iffy to use. Like, if it was a standard counter where you had more control of when it's going to happen, then I feel like it would be a lot stronger, or I don't know, more to my liking. But the fact that you just kind of throw it on and it just randomly interrupts your attacks makes it not as interesting or strong as I feel like it could be. Although you could potentially just use it when you see an incoming attack. So you could use it reactively or as a passive defense option. All in all, I'm not like a huge fan of these types of counters, but he does have a decent one because it's going to freeze the enemies. That much I can say. So let's see, what am I going to go with? I'm going to go with Ice Star. This is really strong. Ice Rain, everything else looks good. I like this setup. So this is the kind of skill setup that I go. It's a lot of quality of life. We have full force burst enhancement. You know, this is going to increase damage during full force burst. Resilience and devotion. You may not need both of these if you don't want them both. I take them both because I feel like full force burst is just so valuable for Kuzan that I want to be in it as long as possible. Hidden resolve. This is for stamina management. I think Kuzan uses up his stamina quite a bit, but Kuzan does have good stamina management techniques, which I will show you once we get into the actual map. But I still like this. This, for me, I personally like this, but I would say that you could potentially trade Hidden Resolve out of this build if you feel like you have good stamina management or you're not worried about stamina management. And you could potentially trade one or both of these full force burst enhancement, like duration enhancement skills out if you wanted to. And then after that we have Cheat Death. Cheat Death is pretty much a mandatory damage skill. And then you have Hero Strength. This is really good on Kuzan because he hits huge space, so he's able to maintain this pretty easily. Alright, so let's get right into this. So Square String. Kuzan's Square String is pretty standard. The most interesting part of it is the second hit, where he actually launches these ice projectiles, and this goes a bit further than the rest of the string, which is, it's kind of weird how that works. So his second hit will kind of hit really far, and then the rest of his hits are more close range. Next we have Square Triangle. Square Triangle, so he's going to kind of stop and just lock enemies down in place, and then he's going to launch a little projectile and push the enemies forward. I feel like this attack just isn't that strong. It's like the damage isn't great. You're very, very vulnerable. It's definitely not good to use on strong enemies with armor in front of you because they're most likely gonna hit you out of it. All around, I think this is his worst move, and he doesn't have a lot of value for it from what I've found so far. Next up, Square Square Triangle. So this is one of his best moves, Square Square Triangle. This is gonna hit a wide space right in front of him, followed by an ice drop. Now this is actually really weird because this should actually hit, but I feel like this is bugging right now. There we go. So I don't know if that was just a bug where you were seeing the first ice tornado, the first part of that was not actually hitting the enemies, but it does hit the enemies. It's supposed to. So as you can see here, it's hitting the enemies, and then he does the ice drop. Very interesting. We're doing bug testing in this guy, guys. Alright, so like I was saying, this is actually one of his best moves because it hits like a solid space in front of him. It's really good for charging R1 skills, solid damage, solid armor break. It's just a good move all around. Next up, square, 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 triangle. Pretty similar to square, square, triangle. This hits a space in front, but then he launches the ice ball you saw. So this has 2 points of freezing. At the end of the icy wind coming up, the last hit of that will freeze, which is what froze Hancock here. And then he'll shoot the ice ball projectile forward, which can also freeze. So this is a really good move for controlling a crowd in front of you and then freezing a wide space of enemies. So look at that. Look how far that goes. Insane. You can break all that. As you saw there, I just used a triangle. What triangle does is for any enemies that are frozen, it will shatter the ice on them. You know, you can kick pretty much any enemy that's gonna, as you saw, it'll shatter all the enemies around, and it deals like a pretty nice spike of damage. This is like one of his best moves in terms of finishing off a combo and just getting like a nice damage spike. Next up we have square, 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 triangle. So as you saw right there, the first hit was a circle radius ice coming up from the ground around him, and then the second hit is this pretty much the same thing, but it goes even further. So this is a really good move for just shutting down all the enemies around you. As you can see, it's gonna freeze a nice space of enemies. So this is gonna freeze a lot of enemies. It's gonna control a crowd. The damage on it is not like outstanding. It's pretty solid overall, but the main perk of this move is to use it so that you can freeze a lot of enemies. That's the main reason you're going to use this, as opposed to say square square triangle, which I think is a better route to go for damage, or square 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 triangle, which is maybe a quicker route for damage and freezing. Pretty solid moves on the ground besides the square triangle. Like I said, this move right here is just, I don't know. I'm not about it. It's not very strong. It doesn't really have any interesting properties, but all of his other ground options are very valuable. So next up, we're gonna go into his air attacks. His air square string launches projectiles, as you can see here. There's no really outstanding thing. There's nothing like really outstanding about the string besides that it launches projectiles. The damage on it is solid. One thing I should note that for almost every character in this game, just using the square string alone can be one of the best ways to deal damage and break armor of a single target. So that's really important to keep note of, because I think maybe sometimes people tend to look towards certain charge attacks to do stuff like that, or that was more of how previous Pirate Warriors played. Like in previous Pirate Warriors, like Pirate Warriors 3, it was usually the charge attacks that were made for stunning enemies. But in this game, it's usually easier to do it with the square string, I find. Alright, so air square triangle. This is one of my favorite moves. So this is going to hit enemies on the ground, and it's going to rain ice balls for a bit of time. And the reason I like this move so much is because you can combo after it. You can land on the ground and combo after it without using stamina, so it's a really, really good move for managing stamina. So let me kind of find a safe spot and show this off. So I'm going to fall to the ground, and as you can see, I can still continue hitting these enemies, launching the enemies in the air, landing on the ground, and then following up further. It's amazing. So you can create a whole loop out of that where you're not even using stamina. You can like jump cancel, use square triangle, and continue comboing the enemies on the ground. Hold on. I'm trying to find a safe spot. I want to show it on like a bigger enemy. There we go. So as you can see, I was able to do that on a boss type enemy as well. Really good move. One of my favorite moves. You know, it's got good application and it's got good swag points. Great move. Square, square, triangle. So this move's gonna, as you can see, it has a little circle rising spears that can hit enemies on the ground, and then he launches forward spears which go really far, as you saw there. As you saw that, that's gonna hit enemies that are grounded, and it's just gonna go for a really long distance. Absolutely amazing. The move isn't like super strong, but it can hit enemies, and it's great for recharging your R1s when you're in the air. Probably his best option for recharging R1s in the air. Next up we have square, 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 triangle, which is the dive kick. Dive kicks in this game are insanely strong, and this dive kick can freeze as well. So it's really great. Really nice that this freezes, it gets you to the ground, immobilizes enemies. You can set up for other stuff. Super good. Now you can also prolong this move. You can charge it, which will kind of juggle enemies you have launched next to you. I feel like there's not a lot of purpose to do this. It's kind of like stylish, a little bit neat, but I think usually just doing the dive kick without charging it is a lot more valuable. But that's like an interesting way. It will not work unless the enemy is like in a juggleable state. Their armor's broken. But really interesting move. Now next up we have square, 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 triangle. Just watch this. It's a really good move. You said it pretty much evaporated those enemies. So it hits a huge space in front, like even bigger than like the square, square, triangle on the ground. Amazing huge space in the front, followed by the freezing projectile. It's such a good move. Probably one of his best strings. Definitely his best string in the air. One of his best strings, if not his best string overall. Great damage, great armor break, freeze effect. Really good move. And that's pretty much it. In the air, he has a triangle which is similar to his ground triangle. It's going to freeze enemies, or not freeze enemies, but it's going to deal enhanced damage and shatter frozen enemies. Let me actually show some full force burst stuff. When we go into full force burst, we can start doing things like freeze kick loops. So as you see there, just doing one square attack was enough to freeze enemies. Then you can kick, you can like kick, you can refreeze, you know, you can do stuff like that. If you want to do it a bit faster, you can dash cancel afterwards. So let me kind of. Alright. Wait, where'd Marco go? Oh, there you go. So as you can see right there, I was able to kill him in one armor break just using some freeze kick loops. I mean, that wasn't like the most optimized or, you know, fluid application of it there, but I was just trying to do it slow enough so that you could all see what was going on. But yeah, between his freeze effects and the kick, you can deal solid damage and you can kill a lot of enemies in one break, which is really strong. It's really good to mix that. And outside of that, I would say that's pretty much it. You know, I can only equip 4 R1 specials, but we can look at Ice Rain here. So as you can see, Ice Rain I was talking about, it falls pretty randomly. The damage is decent, but the thing is, if I was focusing a boss, there's a good chance that it's probably not going to hit a boss. So you can't really rely on it for helping your immediate damage output on what you're focusing on. Then we also have the Sledgehammer. Pretty solid attack, but it's best to use it when enemies are frozen. What's this last one? I think this last one's Ice Star. Ice Star, yes. Ice Star. This move's really good. It's like a really good damage attack. So I'd say that's pretty much it. If you have any questions about any of the moves that maybe I didn't explain properly, or you want to know more about it, feel free to let me know. And definitely check out all of my other Kuzan footage so that you can see these moves in action. Peace.